Welcome everyone to this month's Esports speaker series presented by University of Kentucky Federal Credit Union. This happens the first Thursday of each month at 4 p.m. We feature researchers, academics, and industry professionals from esports and gaming. My name is Nathan Stevens. Today I'm excited to be joined by my co-host, Trenton Upchurch. Hello, Trenton.
Howdy, Nathan.
Hello. And our guest speaker tonight is Michael Hartman, President and CEO of Frogdice Games. Welcome, Michael.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited.
Thanks for joining us. Now we're gonna. Your company does a lot of games, and you've looking through your history. I love some of the games, and the Rainmaker 2 that's coming out looks really phenomenal. There's definitely a twist on how nice little puzzler games are on systems. We've got some questions for you.
Okay.
Can you tell us a little bit about Frogdice and what you all do?
Yeah, absolutely. So Frogdice has been around since 1996. We specialize in online RPGs, MMOs, games like that, but we also make some RPG puzzle games. We have a couple of those on Steam already, Rainmaker and Dungeon Developments. And like you said, we're working on a sequel to Rainmaker. It is a match 3 tower defense game with some kind of light RPG elements and some city building and stuff like that. At its core, it's really mostly a match 3 game, but it has all these other elements to give it a little bit more depth, some story, some extra gameplay variety than just match 3.
That's awesome. So how did you get Frogdice started? When did it start?
Well, it really, for a long time, it was really just a hobby. I mean, my first, kind of studio, kind of pre-Frogdice was I made basically games that are like MUDs, like Threshold, which is Frogdice's first game. I made games like that for BBSs, which are like, pre-internet. If you've ever seen the movie War Games and stuff like that, those systems where people would dial in with their phone. So I made BBSs on there. And I made games for BBSs, and that was my first exposure to that when I was in college. And then I discovered the internet when I was in college. I went to Georgetown University, the one in DC, not the one nearby here. And I met our head librarian it's such a weird. I became friends with Georgetown's head librarian, and as most people might know, in a college, it's not like your local library. That's not someone you normally interact with at all. But I met her online, like on a mainframe. And then I would go to her office and she would teach me stuff about the internet. This is like 1991, 1992, when the internet was like really new. And that's when I learned about MUDs, which are online text RPGs. And I got into those and I was like, oh my God, this is so awesome. And eventually I thought, all of these games are made by like computer science people, programmers, which was cool for the tech side, but the gameplay wise, they were a little rough. The writing wasn't usually very, very good. A lot of the gameplay, the game design wasn't that amazing, but they had the technology down. So I was like, I wonder if someone approached this more from having game design knowledge or writing skill and then learned how to program just enough. And so I taught myself how to program just so I could make, my own MUD. And that's what became Threshold, which is Frogdice's first game. And so, I was making the game and I was figuring out ways to fund it, to pay for it. Because back then, what you normally did is you got some ISP to give you some server space, and then they used the existence of your game as a way to market their ISP. So to get people to like, hey, subscribe to our ISP and you get access to this game. And so that's how it was early on. So, but eventually we started getting big and we wanted to have our own server. Which back then was crazy expensive, getting online, getting your own server, getting hosted somewhere. It wasn't easy like now. You can't just, get an Amazon AWS account for like $15 and good to go. So we, Threshold was going and we developed a business model. I think we might talk about that later. And eventually it was making money. And I was, in law school at that time, making the game. And then I actually started working at a law firm, and I got to my Fisher cut bait moment was, am I going to take the bar exam or am I going to make video games for my life? And so that was my tough decision because taking the bar exam costs a couple $1,000s, sure. Between the prep class you have to do and the bar exam itself. And what I like to say is I decided I wanted to spread joy, not misery. And so I made video games instead of being a lawyer. And for like 10 years, my family was like, so when are you going to go back to being a lawyer? Like they didn't understand, they thought I'd gone through like, I had some kind of mental break or something like that. I was like 20-year-old having a midlife crisis or something like that. But then eventually they realized, no, that's a real, career, so that was, 20 something years ago. So.
Golly. Yeah, you could have been like the best video game lawyer ever. Just you missed that.
That's true. Actually, I think about that sometimes, and I'm like, man, I missed an opportunity there. But yeah, too bad.
Create a new lawyer type. That would have been, yeah. Anyway, Trenton, do you have a do you have a question?
Why Frogdice? Is it because you make riveting games, or like?
Hold on a second.
Thanks, Nathan.
I have to send that to my wife real quick. That's brilliant.
That's what I'm here for.
Yeah. Okay. That's seriously genius. We might use. Can we use that? Can we,
Absolutely.
Can you give me a global exclusive free license to use that?
Yeah, take her away.
Sweet. It's on
from me to you. That's my gift from me to you.
Awesome.
It's recorded now. You got to stick to it.
Exactly. Since it's on the VOD forever, and since we're not playing music, Twitch won't kill it. Cool. So, originally the company's name was Threshold Virtual Environments, which is a very cumbersome name because we were making games, Threshold, but we were also using the technology to make virtual environments for other uses, like for educational purposes. So like you could make an online school. We were working with some schools in the state of Georgia at the time, but they ended up having so much trouble getting anything approved or getting any funding to have any of that stuff made that we were like, this isn't worth it. This is too annoying, and so we punted that stuff. And then we were like, we need a name for our company that isn't so clunky. And we wanted something that made it clear it was game oriented, which is the dice. And we wanted it to be clear that our company really has a lot of whimsy to it. Our games are fun. They're not silly, I would say, but there's always like a sense of humor to them. So we wanted something like that. And our games have always appealed really well to women. So we wanted something in the name that was kind of cute sounding, not like hardcore, like, Blood Dominator games or something like that. We didn't want it to sound, gunmetal games or something like that. We didn't want it to sound like that. And my wife loves frogs, and she was working at the company by then. I actually, met her through our first game, Threshold. So she was working on, all the games at that point. So that's how we got. The other thing was it had to have a domain name. And even then, even back in like the late 90s, it was hard to get a domain name that had, the word you wanted. And also we wanted it to be easy to spell, because like you tell people Threshold and they're like, oh, is that 2 H's? And you're like, yeah, but not right in a row, because there are 2 H's. They're just not like, so people would get confused on where that was. And so we were like, yeah, that's painful. So that's pretty much how we came up with that. And I would say my wife is about 80% of how we got Frogdice as a name. And I probably kicked in the other 20% when we were brainstorming that.
That's awesome. So how long have you been in gaming, like just in general? Like what was your first system?
That's making games almost 30 years, playing games about 43 years, or maybe it's 41. My first system was actually an Intellivision. My parents got it for me. I think it was my 7th birthday. I remember the day that I got it because I was on swim team, and I woke up early and there it was, and I got to play for like 10 minutes and then I had to go to swim team. And I was like, oh my God. So that was my first system, like Space Battle and Astro Smash. They had a cool Dungeons and Dragons game. Their sports games were so much better than Atari. I mean, it was definitely, it was a lot like the whole VCR Betamax thing. The Intellivision was definitely a superior piece of technology, but they just didn't have, the game support, or the first mover advantage, I guess, that Atari had. So that was kind of a bummer for them. But yeah, that was my first system. And then I would play games on PCs. My dad would always bringing a PC home, like a TRS-80 or like a bunch of other like IBM clones. Folks now probably have no idea what that means. Like back in the day, if you wanted to make a computer that was like IBM-ish, you made an IBM clone because you were basically cloning the operating system. and you would see computers advertised like, oh, 80% compatible IBM clone. I mean, think about that today. Imagine if you bought a computer and it would just randomly not run 20% of software. You know what I mean? You'd be like, what? You know, but that was totally normal. So he would bring home computers, and I would dork around on them and try to write little programs and stuff like that. So it both helped me fall in love with games and programming. So
That's awesome.
Very useful that he did that.
Yeah, it's always nice when parents can even indirectly encourage.
Yeah, and they let me play Dungeons and Dragons like crazy. And back then, I was in Georgia, so I was in the South, and there were lots of people who thought Dungeons and Dragons was, from the devil. So I was also really lucky. I started playing Dungeons and Dragons in second grade. I'm very fortunate that they were open to that kind of stuff, and they didn't think, that was a bad influence or anything. I think it definitely encouraged games, Dungeons and Dragons, and video games massively encouraged my love of reading. By second grade, I was just, reading like crazy because I wanted to learn more about, Dungeons and Dragons. I wanted to learn more about then mythology and things like that. So games have always been a huge influence on me, not just like entertainment and not just work, but also academically. It made me fall in love with a lot of academic pursuits as well.
That's awesome. That's awesome. A lot of people typically don't, when they look at gaming, they don't see a lot of positives, but that's nice to hear. That's especially in the creative side. So that's...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and my daughter, who was on the charity stream, she's a gamer too. She was I'll brag on her a little. She's a Plat 2 League of Legends player. As a high schooler. So she has a lot of different interests, and video games definitely inspired a lot of her art, as you guys saw, when she was on the art stream. They can be an incredibly positive influence. I mean, sure, like anything else, if you make your whole life all you do is game, you got to have some balance. But yeah, it has an enormous amount of positive influences.
Yeah, a lot of people sometimes just forget that. That's cool to hear. Trenton?
So it's been rattling around in my head. Where did the idea for Threshold RPG come from? You mentioned it a little bit, but like where did that start to take shape and come together?
I mean, honestly, it probably goes back to playing Dungeons and Dragons as a little kid. I always loved making worlds, building worlds, creating them in my mind and everything like that. I was almost always a DM, even when I played. So I always had that love of, being the game master, the world builder. And I think that deep down, the reason I make games at all is I think I honestly just enjoy making people happy. And I think that's why that I was kind of pushed away from being a lawyer, because you don't get as much of that experience. I mean, I guess you make your clients happy, but I think that's at my core. It really informs everything I do. I think it's why I've recently enjoyed becoming a professor. I love to share the knowledge that I've gained over the years, making games and stuff like that. So I think that's the beginning. Like that's the core motivation, is that I really love building worlds, and I really like, making people happy and entertaining people. So, and like I said, I'd played games like that, and the classic, I'm going to build a better mousetrap. I was like, what if I came at this from a very highly creative way? That's why it's role play required, which is very unique for games. Most games don't bother to do stuff like that. And it does add an extra layer of complexity, because you have to manage your community in a higher level to make sure that you're enforcing that everyone stays in character in the game. Now, granted, there are out of character channels, so it's not like people on Threshold don't get to know each other out of character. But when you're in the actual game, when you're running around, you're in character all the time. So it's an extra level of community management and rule enforcement, but it's very rewarding. And I think it's the reason why Threshold's been around for over 20 years.
That's awesome.
It's really impressive.
Thank you.
Do you think you had any influence on some of the old RPGs of the past, say Baldur's Gate? I know it came out in, 96, if I remember correctly? And then Baldur's Gate 2 years later. You think you had any sort of influence on the early RPG era games?
That's a great question. I've never thought of that. I have, over the years, met people throughout the industry who then would tell me like, oh yeah, I played Threshold when I was, in college or something like that. So perhaps we have. I feel like someone else would have to say that, not me. I feel like if I said it, I'd be, too arrogant. If I did, I hope I did. If I did, I hope it was positive.
Definitely sounds like you had an influence at the very least.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, I'd say if we've made an influence, it's probably through the creation of the free-to-play business model. We were the first. I hope it's not unfair to say. I mean, in a lot of ways, I'm the inventor of that business model. I mean, I used it on BBSs in '91. I used it on Threshold starting in '96. To my knowledge, nobody else used that business model until around 2000. So I know there's a lot of people who hate the free-to-play business model, but that's really just the way you implement it. The mobile style, the gacha game style, where they're trying to get you to spend money within the first, 24 hours, that's not the way I used free-to-play. The way we always used it was, here's our kind of motto. We always say, if we make our game fun enough that people play long enough, eventually they'll buy something. So we always used it as an accessibility route. Like, oh, here's a way to make our games very accessible. You don't have to buy anything. You don't have to commit to a subscription. And, eventually you fall in love with the game and you're like, hey, you know what? I play this game all the time. I might as well spend some money. That's the way I envision free-to-play working. And it works very well for games like ours that are really deep and that you're going to play for a long time. And eventually the game becomes your hobby. I mean, it's no different than like if you play golf, you're going to spend, a couple $100 a year on your hobby or whatnot. That's the way our games work. I think it's kind of unfortunate that free-to-play gets used in a lot of very, manipulative ways, or they use a lot of like gambling mechanics and things like that. Loot boxes, especially like, some of the really bad implementations of that, or like the gambling stuff, like what happened with CSGO and stuff like that. Year or two ago, I think is when that came out, the gambling. And then that led to scams and people, I know it even bled over into Twitch, people's streams that were all about gambling on weapon skins and stuff like that. So it can definitely be used very poorly. But I don't think that's the business model's fault. That's that's the people. That's a people problem.
Yeah.
Definitely.
That's probably a budget officer somewhere who's like, please, we need to make
Yep.
a lot more money. That's
Yeah, like what's that new that gacha game that's really hot right now? I can't remember what it's called.
Genshin Impact.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I've been reading. I need to study up on that more because that's like a hole in my knowledge at the moment. But I've been hearing things that sound not so great. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know much about that game. My oldest daughter has told me about it, and she's joked about it. So I'm assuming.
Yeah.
I'm assuming people have caught on, but yeah, I can't say much about it to help out on that one.
It can get scary, especially when these games target kids. When they do that, I think that's especially pernicious. Yeah, I would definitely like to see some self-regulation within the industry of stuff like that. Because if it doesn't happen from within, it'll eventually happen from without, and then when that happens, it's no good.
Yeah, that almost happened in the early '90s. So.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, that would have really, strangled the infant in the crib. You know what I mean? That would have been really bad for the video game industry early on and crippled it.
Yeah, we would have ended up being Australia, which is not what you want to be. They have like
a
committee.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's if you all don't know about Australia, there's a committee that actually has to approve video games before they'll actually release it to the public, and I'm sure they're not gamers, so that's just assumption.
Yep.
All right, then. Did you have another one, Trenton?
I've got several at this point.
I've got to answer faster so we can rip through some of your questions. I have a tendency to answer in a very long-winded manner. I apologize.
No, it's great.
Feel free.
Absolutely, it's great to get the insight in the industry, and just as a dev, and it's really interesting.
Cool.
Speaking as a dev, have you had any ideas that come out of nowhere that you've not been able to implement into a game smoothly, that you had a bit of trouble getting into a system?
Millions of ideas, not just game ideas, but types of games, all kinds of things. I mean, honestly, it's one of the reasons I've been happy to finally figure out a way to get involved in esports, because my wife and I were both really bullish on esports. I mean, it's 10 years ago, we definitely saw that this was cool and this was going to be something awesome, but none of our games were anywhere close to having esports potential. And even the style of games that we make didn't lend themselves well. I mean, we make super deep RPGs, that's really kind of the core, our DNA of our company. Like, that's not gonna lend itself to an esport. Lots of story, role play. You're gonna battle someone. You're gonna have like a rap battle, role play, rap battle, esport. I mean, I could have just come up with There we go. There's another one. You're saying ideas that come out randomly. Yeah, so nothing we did lended itself well to this, and it was really frustrating because we're like, here's this awesome thing that we see is going to happen. We know it's going to be huge. We can't figure out how to get involved. We can't figure out how to do it with our company. So we finally found a way, through creating Bluegrass Esports to have a involvement in esports, which is great, and our consulting company and doing things like that. But back to game ways, I mean, countless ideas. I mean, I don't know why this one just popped in my head, but one of the ideas that I've struggled to implement for years is being able to mix liquids and have that cause different effects, like different types of drinks or potions and stuff like that. If you think about it, it's really simple in the real world. You mix like a certain liquid with another one and it creates a drink or something like that. But it's really complicated to program stuff like that. It's kind of like how making change is something we do really well, like our brains, but it's actually quite complicated to code that in a game. And that's why most video games have like one currency, gold coins or something like that. Or if they have other currencies, they're literally just, multiples of 10 or 100. So, as soon as you have 100 gold, that turns into one plat, you know what I mean? But really behind the scenes, it's just one number. So yeah, I can't even, I don't know why the mixing liquids one just came up. I haven't thought of that feature. Now I won't get to sleep tonight because I'll be frustrated that I've still failed to code that. But yeah, that happens all the time. I would say it's both a wonderful and a terrible thing about being creative and making video games is the ideas are always popping up and sometimes they become something awesome. It's why I love that I have a game like Threshold. It's being a text game. I can get cool ideas into a game so much faster because all I have to do is, sometimes I just have to write something and bam, it's in. Sometimes I need some code. Sometimes I need a lot of code, but I don't need 3D models. I don't need all kinds of stuff like that, animations. So it's really good for me. And I'm glad that I still develop on that text game because, my ideas can get to a person to play with a lot faster.
So you're a fan of Zork? Is that it?
Oh yeah, big time.
Cool. So, what do you consider your biggest achievement in video games outside of creating your company and creating? What is the one thing you would be most proud of?
I think it is creating the free-to-play business model. And like I said, I actually think it's a good thing. I know a lot of people, like I said, like I already kind of hinted at, I know people are like, oh no, it's terrible. But I think it creates, when done well, and a lot of games do it well, it opens up a lot of games to people that they wouldn't have been able to play. People that don't have a lot of money, they can play these games. And if they're a part of the community, they're contributing. I mean, that's the other thing we always say in our company is that if you're playing the game, that has value. So someone who's just playing and being a part of the community, they're adding value to our company just through their presence, just by role playing with other people. And I think free to play opens up games to more people. I think that's why, we have players from over 70 countries. And I think the fact that the game is free and it's open and accessible makes that possible. And so then people playing our games get to interact with people from all over the world, which gives them, broader experiences. They get to know people. I mean, like one of my best friends through gaming is he now lives in Canada, but at the time he lived in Iran. And I had no other way to know somebody who was Iranian, in Iran. And I think that's a great thing that games bring to people also is the ability to meet people from all over the world and, learn their experiences. And instead of just hearing on the news, oh, this country is bad, there's people are evil, you meet people from those countries and you're like, actually that guy's kind of awesome. Maybe we don't need to hate this country because maybe there's unfortunate things with their government, but maybe the people are actually pretty cool. And so I think that's probably a combination, I guess. My contribution is, free to play, which makes a lot of games more available to people. And then I think just making very community oriented games have brought a lot of people together. Hundreds of people have gotten married having met through our game. Myself included, I met my wife. She was playing Threshold. We were at different law schools at the time. So I think that's really my contribution. My business contribution is inventing free to play. And then my contribution to the world is just, making games that bring people together.
You know, when you describe free to play, like you just described free to play, it's really hard to have any spite towards free to play. So
Yeah, it can be good. I mean, it's just like it's like fire. You know what I mean? It can cook your food, it can keep you warm, or it can burn your house down. So yeah.
it's a good way to put it. It's very well said. Trenton, what do you got?
Kind of off topic. What's your greatest achievement in beating like a high score? We talked about your developments in video games, but like, do you have like a favorite high score that you're very proud of, or beating a certain really difficult game, something along that lines?
I think maybe my greatest achievement as a gamer is probably playing Dark Age of Camelot. We had like what they call in that game. It was like a gank squad. It was like an 8-man team. That was the party size in Dayak. And if every server would have a couple of these, like 8-man quote gank squads, like really good players who played really well together. And we would just roam around the frontier in Dark Age of Camelot, and we could take on groups of like 30 or 40 people and win almost every time. And so we were definitely terrorizing the entire RVR landscape of that game. And it was a very high skill cap game for their PvP. A lot of variety in abilities. You had to use a lot of complicated CC and stuff like that, and not break CC, and you had to really be careful with how you did everything. We were always coming up with new ways to fool, because ultimately then you'd have to fight the other realms gank squads, and then that was when it was really on. There was this one, and it's funny that this sticks in my mind. We were Midgard, so on the Percival server, and there was a gank squad on the Hibernia side called Paladox, and they were just obliterating everyone. And we finally figured out a way to counter their strategy. They had a big strategy of using a lot of PvAOE, like point blank AOE spells, stacking their multiple, I think it was enchanters was the class, stacking them on top of each other, so people wouldn't realize how much PvAOE damage was getting pumped out. And so we figured out ways to counter that until eventually we could beat them every single time we fought. So I'd say that was probably one of the pinnacles of my gamer achievement. And my wife was in that group too, so that's pretty cool. And to give you an example, I'll tell this story. An example of how hardcore we were about our RVR. We were out RVRing one night in our gank squad, and my wife's water broke. And so Anya, who was drawing on the art stream, it was Anya. But the RVR was really intense because there were like relic keeps in danger, and that's big time. Like sometimes relic keep defenses would take like 18 hours, sometimes 36 hours. If they happened in the middle of the night, you'd call people on the phone, wake them up. So keeps were a big deal. And so, she's like, oh no. So she calls the doctor, and they're like, well, you don't have to come just yet. You got some time. So we RVR'd for like another 12 hours after her water broke before we went to the hospital. Now, like I said, it wasn't as dangerous as it sounds. The doctor was like, yeah, don't come. Contractions are so far apart. There's no reason to come, and you'll end up just spending an extra day in the hospital. The funny thing about this, though, is years before that, on Threshold, one of our players typed on one of the out-of-character channels, like, oh, hey, my wife's water just broke, and he was still playing. And on the out-of-character channel, I was like, why are you still playing? You need to be at the hospital. Like, I was criticizing him for this decision, right? Years later, we would end up doing the same thing. But the extra twist of that story is that guy eventually, like 10, 15 years later, became a programmer for us. And then he moved to Lexington, and and his daughter moved here too. So it's really funny how that story all came around in multiple ways.
That is commitment to the craft. I appreciate it.
Hey, the keep has to be defended. I mean, like Anya, sorry. So that's why Anya's birthday is, the day it is instead of one day sooner, I guess.
I just picture your wife going, Doc, how many hours do I have? This is important to know.
Much. Yeah. I guess it's good. I won't give out her whole birthday, but she's born on a 14th, so she would have been on the 13th. So every Friday the 13th it hitched. So we saved her. So from having a bad luck birthday.
That's a good call. You made the right decision, Michael. It was the best call you could have done.
Yeah, on multiple levels. That's
to defend. Oh boy. So what's the greatest thing you've gotten out of the video game industry in general? Is it the people? What is it?
Number one, it's definitely my family, because I met my wife because of gaming. And then it keeps my my wife and my kids and I all pretty close because we all game. I think right now my younger daughter, who's a freshman in high school, I think her esports team is playing right now. She's on the League of Legends esports team at Lafayette High School. So it's my family, number one, most important thing. I never would have met my wife if it wasn't for gaming. And like I said, I think it really keeps us close with our kids because it's a hobby that we all share and that we will probably share forever. So I really value that. And then next, which is almost, there's your family you're born into and the family you choose. So I have my immediate family, but then my extended family, which is, all the gamers in our games. Not just the gamers in the games we make, but my gamer friends in other games. I still talk to I'm still friends with a couple of people from that Gank squad on Dark Age of Camelot. And so, I've made a lot of good friends in games I've played and games I've made. And I mean, probably one of my best friends in the world that I've known for 30 years. I've never, ever met him in person. His name's Steve. I call him Califar because that was what his character was on Threshold, even though I met him before Threshold. I talk to him every single day without fail. Like we're on Discord just all day long. We have a running conversation on Discord about random crap. And I've never met him in my life. I hope someday, maybe the pandemic will finally end and we can travel and stuff. But he's been one of my closest friends, thanks to gaming. So gaming has given me like my family and just countless friends that I am extremely appreciative and grateful for. And, even, hopefully I won't go into too much detail in this story, but this year was difficult. I had a major back surgery. I had a T9 to L4 spinal fusion. I was in the hospital for like 17 days. And gamer friends really helped me get through it all the months that I was, dealing with the build up to finding out I needed surgery and stuff. And my gamer friends and my family as well, that's how I got through it. I mean, I wouldn't have gotten through it without them. So I owe a lot to video games.
That's awesome. That's really cool. That's awesome. So what do you consider the most challenging aspects of running your own studio? Like what makes it tough?
I think think about it for a second. Let's see. I'm going to answer it in two parts. One's like business side, and one's kind of like the emotional side. Business side, I think the hardest thing by far, especially right now, is just visibility. Figuring out how to get your games discovered. There's when we put our first game out on Steam, I think there were like 300 games a year would come out on Steam. Now it's 10,000. Yeah. So, and that's just one storefront. If you've got iTunes Store, you've got Epic Game Store, you've got all the consoles have their own stores now, storefronts, which is great because there's more ways to put games out. And I'm glad that there are more ways. I'm glad there are less barriers because you get more cool games. But it's really hard to get your game discovered. That's something that I really wish would improve. I wish that platforms like Steam would do more to help out in that way. But that's a whole other question. So business-wise, that's the hardest thing, getting visibility for your games. Kind of on the emotional side, I think one of the hardest things is, honestly, and this is true of so many things in life right now, is kind of dealing with haters. When you do anything creative and you put this is probably true for everyone, artists, writers, musicians. When you do something creative and you put your work out there, there will be a never-ending torrent of people who want to tell you that your work is crap. And they have so many different reasons. Maybe they're jealous, maybe they're mad about, something that you do or whatnot, but there's a never ending torrent of people. I mean, I have people to this day that will just say, oh, your games are garbage, you suck. And it's like, I've been doing it professionally for 30 years. I'm still in business, I mean, that you'd think that would be a self-evident proof that my games are at least good enough that I've been able to stay at it this long, but no, there's still no end of people who want to tell me that I'm a failure or that my games are garbage and stuff like that. And you have to learn to just ignore those people. I know it's a kind of a cliche now, ignore the haters, but super important, especially for creative people, because it's hard to put your creative work out there because it's a piece of yourself. But you shouldn't be afraid to, and you just have to really ignore those people and realize that when you're sharing something creative, it's going to mean a lot to people.
Yeah, I know. People who spew venomous stuff, it's really hard to take some days.
Yeah,
really,
definitely.
really hard. And that stinks. It stinks that people are out there like that. That
Yeah.
just do it to do it.
Even after 30 years, sometimes it still gets me down. And then I'm like, no, Michael, you've been through this before. You know what I mean? Like, so, but you have to really steel yourself against it. Because it'll never stop. I think and it doesn't matter. I mean, some of my other friends in the industry, like Cliff Blazinski and stuff, like when he went and made his own studio, and they actually made some pretty cool games, but the video game industry is tough. And so when the company, ended, the amount of hate he dealt with was enormous, One of my friends here in town, Wes Keltner, Gun Media, they made the Friday the 13th game. And when they had to stop developing the game because of a lawsuit between the IP holders, I mean, he deals with tons of hate over that. And that was his baby, I mean, he hurts worse than anyone that he can't make content for his game anymore. And yet it doesn't stop people from blaming him and trashing his team. That stuff's very unfortunate. It's definitely something that's highly prevalent in the game industry. It's a real bummer. I hope it changes.
Is there? Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry. No. Go ahead.
Is there a lot of love though, like from?
Oh my God, so much. Yeah, I'm glad you said that because we don't want to get we don't want to give the negative too much attention. The amount of love that we get is enormous. Just like I was saying on the last thing, people that reached out to me, some of our gamers, sent me stuff in the hospital, or even just calling or emailing or messaging me online, and then just watching people have fun play your games is really amazing. Watching people just having a blast. Or, normally we have a convention every year called Frogicon. And I just love listening to people having incredibly deep conversations about things that happened in the game 15 years ago, and then how they impacted something 5 years ago or last year or last week, how the history of the game and all the characters means so much to them. And they can just sit there and have, 10-hour conversations with people about things their character did or their character or the other person's character did. So yeah, it is incredibly rewarding to see people enjoy your creation, without question.
Yeah, it's always good. The positivity definitely gets overlooked some days.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. So I know I sort of understand the concept of Game Pass. And I've been dying to ask a developer this question. I know that Microsoft offers like a whole library of games, and people pay like a very minimal price. Do you think Game Pass is something that's good or bad for the industry, or do you think it helps studios like you out versus helping an EA out? Like what's your thoughts on it, basically?
This one's going to be tough, and I hope that my answer isn't too lame. The good part is that it does give funding to some people making games, especially if they're able to negotiate a good deal with Microsoft or EA or whatnot. It can help games get made that would not have been made. Of course, the bad thing is, will it become the Spotify of video games, where there's so many games on these passes, and you're only getting paid on how much time people play your game? Well, then it's like an hour of your game is like 0.00001, penny, stuff like that. It's going to get to that point. There's other problems too. Is it going to eventually affect game design? Are people going to start, are they going to make a game, and if it was ideal, they'd make it 20 hours? And are they going to now add a bunch of random, time sinks to make it 40 hours just so people play longer so they get paid more? If it starts doing that, then I think it's really bad. If people start making games longer just because they want to get more Game Pass revenue or something like that, that would be kind of a worst case scenario. The other problem is, I'm not sure how much it's going to help with discoverability. Like I was saying, that's one of the biggest challenges is getting your game discovered. Like so many things, if you're early in Game Pass, it's going to be great because you're going to get money up front and people are going to find your game, and then they're going to learn about your studio, and maybe they'll buy your next game, et cetera, et cetera. So the early adopters are going to do well. I kind of predict that eventually it'll become highly saturated, and then it will be very Spotify-ish. And then I think probably it will start making people deliberately make the games more grindy. Grinding can be fun. I think grinding gets a bad rap too. If a game is fun, grinding out XP or reputation or something like that can be fun. But if it's a bad grind just to kill time so you can make Game Pass revenue, that's no good. Now, making free-to-play games is one thing that's nice, because even if I had a game that got on Game Pass, as long as I have free-to-play elements, I'm fine. It doesn't matter to me if I'm only getting, one 10,000th of a penny per hour because they might buy some skins or some other stuff, and then I'm fine. So I definitely think it'll also push more game developers towards free-to-play microtransaction stuff, and gamers may like that or not. So I guess my answer really is the jury is out, but I think it'll be pretty good for a while, and then I think eventually it'll get bloated and abused and not be so good, and then they'll have to come up with something else. I think that's kind of the cycle that almost everything follows. But I do think that if they don't figure out a way to keep it from becoming Spotify-like as far as how little money devs get, that it will eventually become really, really bad.
Yeah, it's that's one of the biggest concerns I've run across is that eventually it's going to hit a wall at some point. Yeah, that's as all services do, and I'm sure Netflix is feeling that right now a little bit. But a good answer though, really good answer.
Cool,
I think we have time for one more question. Trenton, it's over to you, man.
We did get one from the audience. How much do streamers play in exposure and marketing for a game? Because that's changed quite a bit over the last few years.
That's a good question.
That's a great question. I actually had a big, like a 25 long Twitter thread about this a couple weeks ago. Some people, you might remember that this became kind of a hot topic on Twitter a few weeks ago when somebody from Stadia, a creative director of one of the games on Google Stadia, said a bunch of stuff about Twitter. Streamers should pay a licensing fee to game devs to stream their game, and it exploded, of course. I think that, and basically my answer and what I said in the thread is streamers, and we've worked with hundreds of streamers in our games, and we actually put specific features in some of our games just to make them more streamer friendly. The reason that Rainmaker's policy system works the way it does was specifically with streamers in mind. And what that is like every time you beat a boss, or sometimes every level, when you come back to town, you're like, one of your ministers comes to you with something that's happened in the city, like, blah 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 has happened. What are we going to do? And you have like choices. And the reason it's just like 4 or 5 simple choices was specifically so streamers could like put it to their chat. Okay, guys, what are we going to do? 1, 2, 3, or 4. We made it specifically like that. So we love working with streamers. And when I say streamers, I mean both Twitch and YouTube. I kind of group them together. But over time, the benefits became less. Like I'd say, kind of like I was saying about the Game Pass. Like 6 years ago, having a couple of people stream your game was awesome. The people in the chat would go and check out your game or maybe buy your game. It wasn't that difficult to get streamers excited to play your game. 4 years ago, it was okay. And then as of about 3 years ago, it started to not be so great. Now, a lot of times I say that and people freak out because the truth is this is a nuanced answer, and nuanced information doesn't go well online. It's got to be streamers good, streamers bad, but it's not. It's neither one of those. They're good, but it's not as great as some people think. Especially there are a lot of marketing companies out there, and their entire business model is basically getting indie game devs to spend $10,000 so they can get them a bunch of streamers to play their game. And what they really do is they just take $10,000 from the indie devs, and it doesn't really accomplish much. Because getting like 5 or 6 streamers to play your game for an hour it may not even deliver a single sale, even if they stream to thousands of people. Streaming has changed a lot. Like the reason viewers watch streams now is different. Like when it was really new, part of it was, I want to see what games they're playing so then I can find a cool game to play. But now, as streaming has evolved, it's its own form of entertainment. It's not an alternative, gaming marketing, commercial. So now people come and they're there for the streamer, their personality, the fun and hijinks they're going to get up to. The game is cool, but it's kind of secondary. So the people that are there, they're not there to be. It's not QVC. They're not there to look for games to buy. So they're not in that shopping mindset. And now also, there's so many streams and so many games on there. It's really hard to make an impact. Now, I do think streaming and influencers is an important part of your well-balanced breakfast as far as your marketing plan. I think it's also valuable for community management. Like if you have a very successful game and you want to make sure that your players know about some cool thing that's coming out or some new system or some new piece of content, a great way to get the word out is through streamers because they can, play it and reach a lot of people. So it has a very beneficial, there's a lot of synergy between streamers and game devs, and it's very positive to use streamers. but it's not as slam dunk as it once was. Like, oh, I'm going to get, so and so is going to stream my game and that's it. I'll make $1 million. Like, no, it doesn't work like that anymore. It's just like one other part of what you need to do to get your game out there. It's a great way to interact with your own customers who might be, viewers of a stream. On the flip side, I think streamers need to understand that they're not adding as much value as they think. The last time that we were reaching out to some new streamers when we came out with our MMO Stash, and then there'd be channels that had 30 average viewers, and they wanted a couple $1,000s to play your game for an hour. I was just like, I may not get one sale. Like, that doesn't work, So there are some unrealistic. The problem is they hear about say man versus game getting paid 30 grand to stream a game or something like that, and they think that, oh well, I'm almost as good as him, so I'll just ask for 5,000. No. So, and they don't realize that those big deals, that's part of a huge marketing budget, overall branding play. They're going to advertise on television, they're going to advertise, so it's a whole different situation going on there. So streamers, it's really important. They're an important part of your overall marketing plan. They're an important part of community management. They're fun. It's a cool medium also. I think it's fun for developers. It's a way for developers to, especially if they go on the stream with the streamer, it's a way for developers to talk to some future potential gamers directly. So it's cool. But people need to, they need to manage their expectations. If you're the dev, having a bunch of people stream your game isn't going to result in as many sales as you might think. So don't get your hopes too high. And then streamers, don't think that you're valuable, but it's not an instant, you're not delivering instant massive wealth either. So you got to keep that in check.
Everybody's expectations in check.
Yeah, unfortunately, I hate to be like the cold water, you know what I mean? But it's important that people manage their expectations on both sides.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I always have to be careful. I'm not trying to be negative. Streamers are awesome. I love that this is developed as a form of entertainment. And I love that games are a part of it. Kind of like looping back to our very first question about talking about how the positive impacts of games. I think it's cool that something like Twitch happened, and video games were obviously a critical part of it. They provided the foundational content upon which people can build streaming content. I think that's great. So I don't think that they need to pay a licensing fee to gamers. That's always the big question. Do you think they should pay a fee? I'm like, no, I don't think that. I think that'd be bad for everybody. It'd be bad for games. It'd be bad for streaming. If anything like that ever, this is what I always say, if anything like that ever happens, it will only happen because all parties agreed it would be good for them to make it happen. And what I mean by that is if Twitch started making deals with developers where they figured out a way to give them some kind of subscriber rev share or something like that, and in exchange, they developed a cool API that game devs could tie into. So then things the streamers did or things the chat did could literally affect the game. You know what I mean? Cool things like that. I only think there should only be a financial arrangement if the partnership is deeper than just money. If the partnership involves some cool tech, some cool features that makes the whole experience better for everybody, better for the gamers, better for the people in stream chat, better for the streamers. If it improves the experience there, which makes it a richer experience and more valuable, well then, yeah, there should be some kind of rev share situation. But for the way things are now, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, it seems like a very a shallow give or take in a sense. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's an excellent answer, and I think you're dead on streaming. So it is fun though. It is a heck of a thing to do, especially in the morning. So
absolutely, that's tough. I'm a night owl too, so that's rough. Morning streams.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, a lot of people love mornings. But on that note, I want to thank Michael for joining us. Thank you very much for taking time out and joining us on this week's show. So
thanks for having me. I really had fun.
And thank you. And Trenton, thank you for your wonderful questions and joining us as well. So appreciate that. So,
absolutely. Glad to be here.
That's awesome. So thanks for watching our Esports speaker series presented by the University of Kentucky Federal Credit Union. Our next guest in the series will not be until 2021. So, giving you a little bit of break so everybody can decompress for the holidays. And so follow our Twitch channel if you can. We'd love for you to follow it. Wait for some good announcements about future guests in the series, and catch all the content produced by UK's community and our Twitch channel. I think you'll love it. So on that note, have a wonderful night, and we'll catch you later. See ya.
Okay.